Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to this meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. We're going to get started. We have no regrets to date. Any declarations of interest? Nope. I see none. Can we confirm the minutes of our meeting on Thursday, the 2nd of August 2018? Are they carried? Carried. Great, thank you. So we have two substantive items on our agenda for which we have speakers on both items. The first relates to the renovation of the original house and construction of a rear addition at 119 York Street, and we're going to have a presentation, and as I said, there are speakers for that item. And then our second item is an application to alter the Medical Arts Building at 180 Metcalf Street. Lastly, when we get to other business, we're going to have a staff update on Somerset House, but we'll get to that later in the agenda. So given that there are speakers on both items, we're not going to pass either on consent, and we'll go to our first item, which, as I said, relates to 119 York Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We're going to start with a brief update from staff, and then we'll go to our public delegations.
Sorry, colorblind. Right. Good morning, everyone. This application is for the alteration to a designated property at 119 York Street in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. The proposal includes demolition of non-historic rear additions, the construction of a new rear addition, some restoration work on the original house, and landscape modifications. The property is located on the north side of York Street between Dalhousie Street and Cumberland Street, close to the eastern boundary of the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. The original building is in relatively good condition, with most heritage architectural elements intact, including the cornerstone coins, the corbelled window surrounds, decorative barge board, and the curved finial. The original windows on the front facade have been replaced recently with unsympathetic contemporary windows, which are not fitted properly to the original slightly arched openings, as seen in the middle photograph above. If you look at the photo to the right, the original form and massing of the heritage house is clearly visible, extending to the rear about 10 meters. In this photo, a portion of the one-story rear addition that is to be demolished is visible. The streetscape of the north side of York Street in this part of the district is dominated by low-rise residential structures with a character that has evolved over the decades to include a mix of both residential and commercial uses. The subject property is in the middle of this photo. The photo on the left indicates the current state of the front yard, as well as the public right-of-way in front of 119 York Street. Although there is a healthy mature tree seen in the photo above, the space is otherwise dominated by deteriorating pavement, an informal parking spot, and a fence surrounding the private patio. The photo on the right shows the shared driveway that separates the subject property from its western neighbor. The two-story horse stable is visible in the distance, along with the seven-story condo building in the background. The existing conditions in front of the subject property are contrasted by the well-landscaped public space located in the right-of-way immediately to the west of 119 York Street and extending to the intersection of York and Dalhousie. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, the existing rear additions are to be removed. They are one story in height and are identified in the plan above. These additions do not have cultural heritage value. The site plan shows the removal of the existing rear additions, the retention of the original structure, the new 2.5-story rear addition, and considerable landscape interventions both on the subject property, the adjacent property with which the driveway is shared, and on the public realm located in front of the building. The landscape initiatives are to add ground cover plantings around the existing mature tree, to add an oval-shaped garden in front of the property, and to replace the asphalt driveway in its entirety with brick pavers. These pavers will also extend into the neighboring courtyard that separates the horse stable from the next-door residence. The intent of this landscape work is, in part, to improve the heritage streetscape and extend the positive public realm experience along York Street further east from this intersection. This image shows the proposal from across the street. The rear addition is visible beyond a small break on the west facade. The secondary entrance to the retail space and the accessory offices is also visible on the left side of the building, toward the back. All facades visible from the street or from the condo building to the rear are to be clad in aged red brick to match the existing cladding material. This rendering shows the building from York Street looking west. The addition is not visible from this perspective. The architectural elements of the facade are to remain, with new fitted wood windows to replace the existing windows. The front and rear elevations highlight the scale of the new addition, which is subordinate and complementary to the original building by virtue of being lower with a matched roof form and pitch. The rear elevation shows a red brick living wall where it's exposed above the first floor. The drawing indicates the planting of English ivy from within a planter box on this rear wall. This west elevation shows the extent of the addition to the rear, with the original building identified on the right. Should have brought a pointer. There are 4 transom-style windows proposed for the side of the addition, and 1 window to be added to the original building. All new windows are to be wood-framed. 3 skylights are proposed for the addition, with 2 proposed on the original building. The purpose of the skylights is to bring light into the upper floor of the building. The portion of the addition where the building abuts the side property line is proposed to be clad in vertical metal siding. This portion of the addition is located immediately adjacent to the stable next door, and this wall will not be visible. There are no windows proposed on the east elevation, and the proposed cladding material is vertical metal siding. This facade of the addition is not visible from the streetscape. Staff finds the proposals to be in line with the principles and conforming with the guidelines of the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. The continued evolution of this property from its original residential use to its transformation to a restaurant and cafe over the past couple decades, and finally to the proposed retail use, helps to tell the story of the layered and diverse character of the Byward Market and its adapted building stock. By locating the addition to the rear, the proposed adaptive reuse of the property conserves the original form, massing, and architectural expression of the original house. Replacing the unsympathetic windows with wood windows to fit the original openings, which are sound versions of the original windows in terms of size, form, materials, and detailing, is consistent with the applicable conservation guidelines of the plan. The project is consistent with Parks Canada standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in the following ways. The original heritage building and its architectural elements have been preserved, along with the original massing of the building. Located at the rear and slightly set in, the addition is distinguishable from the original house, yet compatible in terms of the brick cladding, as well as its roof form and pitch. The change of use to retail and the addition to the building are accommodated without changing the character-defining elements of the property. The non-historic additions are being removed. Slight change to the order of the slides here, but I just want to discuss the that a summary of the heritage permit application was circulated to adjacent property owners within 35 meters of the subject property, to the ward councillor, and to Heritage Ottawa, and to the Lower Town Community Association as well. Staff is aware of concerns that have been brought forth, which relate to the impacts of the proposed addition on adjacent properties. Revisions to the proposed designs were submitted yesterday, and they are summarized as follows. The windows proposed on the south elevation have been reduced in size, so 5 transom windows are now proposed in order to address privacy concerns on the adjacent property to the west. The Shaw brick pavers on the shared driveway between the subject property and the property at 113 to 115 York, the horse stable is located, is now to extend into the courtyard of that property. On the rear facade, the red brick is to replace the originally proposed metal cladding. English ivy is also proposed as a visual mitigation measure, creating a living wall facing the existing condo building. The roof pitch of the proposed addition has been slightly lowered to reflect the roof pitch of the existing house, providing a minimal reduction in massing, as seen from the condo building to the rear. So in addition to the heritage permit, this project requires the site plan control application and a minor variance application. The final recommendation in this report provides discretion to staff, for staff to permit minor design changes should they be required. Heritage staff will continue to work closely with development review as these processes unfold. So, getting back to the recommendations, the recommendations of this report are to approve the application to demolish the existing rear additions and approve the new construction and landscape interventions in accordance with the revised plans. And by the way, the revised plans have been indicated in this presentation. Minor design changes are to be delegated to the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development, and staff recommend establishing a 2-year expiry date from the date of issuance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to ask the Vice Chair just to formally introduce the technical motion which brings forward these new plans which were received yesterday, which were just spoken about by staff. So, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes, I'd like to move this technical motion that whereas the applicant has submitted revised versions of the site plan on September the 12th, be it resolved that the report recommendations 1 and 2 be amended by replacing the date of July 4th, 2018 with revised plans September 12th. I'm abridging this slightly to avoid the legal whereases. And that the discussion section of the report be amended by replacing the words, including the majority of the west facade, the 2-story front-facing bay of the addition, with and from the condominium building to the rear. And be it further resolved that the discussion section of the report be amended by deleting the words that are not visible from the street, mainly the east-north rear end portion of the west facade abutting property line, and be it further resolved that documents 2, 3, 4, and 8 of the report be replaced with the revised site plan September the 12th. And these are attached, and I hope they're up somewhere.
Okay, you're not formally moving it yet. The Vice Chair is just introducing the motion so that everybody in the room is aware of what that motion will be when we vote on it at the end of the item. But thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. We're going to move now to public delegations, and I have so far 6 on my list. And for those who are here for the first time, when I call your name, if you can come up to the front here and turn your microphone on, and every speaker has 5 minutes to speak. So we'll start with Luc Gervais, and he will be followed by Gary McLaughlin. So Mr. Gervais. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Luc Gervais. I own 121, 123 York Street. First of all, thank you for having us, giving the opportunity to speak briefly with you this morning. My 2 biggest concerns with the proposed building are as follow. The first one is depreciation of my property value. Current use of 123 York is residential. I do have a backyard back there, and it's currently used as a place of leisure for the kids to play. Where I mean the potential depreciation, I should say more specifically, I can't guarantee that it's going to depreciate, but there is the likelihood of it. I've got this big structure made out of metal, for that matter, that's going to be extending the whole length of my backyard, 21 feet from ground, then there's the roof, so it's really going to close us in. It's going to almost feel like somewhat of a prison yard to that degree. And my secondary concern, which is probably the biggest concern I have, is the snow that inadvertently will fall off that roof with the pitch it has and the fact that it's a metal roof. There's going to be snow in my backyard. It's going to close off my access to emergency exit from the back of the building into the laneway. The problem with snowfall is that with the metal roof, it fall any given time, and it will fall all of it at once. So you may end up with 2-3 feet of snow, if not more, between the 2 buildings. And on the other side, which is not my building, that's John Cundall, but he'll inadvertently have the same problem with his laneway being blocked off. So that's my biggest concern. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much for coming out this morning and expressing those points. I don't see any questions, so thank you. And the one thing that I will say to staff and to you is the issue of the snow building up and what happens to the snow is something you heard the staff at the end of the presentation talk about the fact that there will be a site plan process, which essentially means that's going to be the opportunity to look at how the proposed building and the site works. So at the risk of sounding overly bureaucratic, and I'm sorry about this, but I just want to reassure you that that kind of issue, although not under consideration here, will be considered as part of the site plan, and your councillor who's here will have an opportunity to bring that issue before staff as part of site plan.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we have Gary McLaughlin, followed by Lucy Hensel.
Good morning.
Good morning and welcome.
As you indicated, my name is Gary McLaughlin. I'd like to thank the Building Heritage Subcommittee for allowing me to voice my opinion on the expansion of the Heritage Building. I live at 144 Clarence. My unit faces 119 York. When I look out my windows at the moment, I see backyards and buildings of 121, 119, 115 York, and York Street itself. When we purchased the condo, one factor in buying it was that the buildings facing us were deemed heritage. What I took from reading of the City of Ottawa heritage designation is that any alterations to these buildings would focus on three areas: streetscape, character of the neighborhood, and most importantly, character of the building itself. With this information, I did not think I would be presented with my view to be limited to a 34-foot high wall, less than 2 feet from my patio. Looking at the application, it does seem to meet one heritage criterion, the streetscape, but that's the only one. The proposal is asking to take one of the most beautiful single-family homes in the market and turn it into a warehouse. The massive size of the expansion dwarfs and removes all the character of a single-family house. It's a warehouse. There's no semblance of single-family home left. To finish up, I believe the committee needs to weigh the needs of all the members of the community affected by the tea house project. Not only does the project have to keep its front elevation in keeping with heritage requirements, but it's the size and use have to be in keeping with the surrounding owners. Extending the current tea house to a commercial size project presented does not strike an appropriate balance of all affected. In the same way, the committee could not support a front elevation that is not keeping with heritage considerations, it should also not accept modifications that would significantly negatively affect surrounding occupants. Again, thank you for allowing me to voice my concerns.
Thank you for coming out this morning. I see no questions from members, so thank you for coming out. And we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Lucy Hensel, who will be followed by John Kundal. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting us to voice our opinions. Mine is similar to Gary's. I am a resident of 144 Clarence. I'm not going to be as directly affected as he is because my unit is higher up, but I'm equally concerned for the impact this will have on the immediate neighbors lower down. Not just Gary, but even 2 floors above him will be significantly affected by the mass of the proposed extension and its proximity to our building. The loss of light, the loss of space that these residents will experience. I have equal concern for our neighbor down below, John Kundal, and what that will do to his property, but he will be defending that. But I'm very concerned that if this large addition to the rear of the heritage building does go through, that he will be so significantly affected that ultimately we will lose one of the wonderful heritage aspects of the market, which is his stables and the services he provides. And more I feel we are diminishing the quality of life in the market based on its heritage massing and space, and the sense that these original houses, I appreciate that it's being kept and in fact improved from the streetscape, but part of the whole neighborhood lives off these backyard spaces and the feeling of how it was that the backyards, I agree, were being used, but they were not being built up. And the density of building, to me, is excessive for this area and for in keeping with the heritage quality of our neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? No, I see none. Thank you very much for coming out. So next on the list is John Kundal, to be followed by Ron Smith. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, thanks for having us here. I guess my neighbors said a lot, so it was pretty good. The only concern really I have is the size of the building, and building right on the property line that I can't repair my stable or anything. And with the height, I don't know how much air is going to be going into our stable for the horses, you know, because it might be boxed off that, and we won't get no sun. So that's my biggest concern is if I can't keep the horses there, well, we'll have to move, but it's part of heritage more than the houses, you know what I mean? So that's the biggest concern, and they raised all the points that I was going to say, so it's no issue repeating it.
Okay, if you just hold on one sec, I see Councillor Fleury has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kundal, we know each other well. Maybe you could take a few seconds just to talk about the uses of the stable. So the stable has been in the market for how long?
We've been in business 130 years. At that location, we're about 80 years.
80 years. And maybe you could give us kind of a general, what are your operations there? How many horses? What's the function of the stable there?
Okay, we keep 2 draft horses to do rides on the market and in the areas like Overbrook, Rockcliffe, Manor Park, Carnivals. And we have 6 little miniatures that we have a handicapped man comes in every day and walks them in the park, and it's a big attraction for the market. He must get 100 pictures every day taken of him. And with the horses, I mean, you put a lot of smile on people's faces. And it's been a family business for 130 years. So I think it's one of the oldest businesses in Ottawa, owned by the same family for that length of time.
So correct me where I'm wrong, but your concern, you're not opposed to the retail use, you don't even have an issue to, you seem very comfortable with the brand and so on, and the heritage protection of the facade. Your concern is with the addition and the impact on what that would mean for the stable operations and also with access. So you haven't really explained that, and you and I, when you met, you were quite concerned around safety relating to that right-of-way access.
Yeah, it's a right-of-way laneway, and if they got a door in the back, and I don't know if there's going to be a handicap door or what it's going to be at the back, because you don't know until it's done. And people will be coming in and out of the laneway. So if somebody slips and falls, whose responsibility is it if I have a joint laneway with these people? I don't want to be sued for their customers going in and out of their yard. And there is a big problem with ice and snow on the roof that's there now, because it builds up there and then it comes down all at once, and it's about half a ton of snow and ice coming down onto the laneway. So you just got to be careful. We always walk on our side, because if it comes down, at least you got a foot that it's not going to hit you.
And just briefly, so you have an existing right-of-way agreement, or the property next to you has a right-of-way agreement, which you acknowledge. You've had working relationships with the neighbors for years. But tell me around, you've explained to me that now the fences are locked on a general basis just to prevent access to the back and safety for the horses and residents, right?
Yeah, there's a gate in front and we lock it every night because there's a lot of street people go in the yard and do things, and kids from the bars go in there and urinate and all that stuff, so we lock it. And also, if there's people going in and out that we don't know, like we have pretty well much control of it, and the stable door is open and they have kids and they go into the stable without permission and a pony bites them or something like that, you know what I mean? You're taking all our privileges away right there, you know? And also, I know the bylaw is that you can build on the line, like a property line, but they're building right against the stable at one point. And there's a place in the back of our stable that's about 4 feet wide or 3 feet wide that we store stuff. And the same with them, if they build and there's 2 feet left over, who's going to clean all that dirt that goes in there, leaves and stuff, you know, that somebody could start fires. People get into places that you don't think they're going to get into. And but if the property was moved over a little bit from my line at the stable, well then there'd be more air, I think, would go into the stable, because we have a fan, exhaust fan, that goes onto the other property, but it's been there for 45 years, and we never had a complaint.
Right.
So if the building's going to be only 3 or 4 feet, like, if you look at the planning, they don't give you much dimensions where the building's going to continue in this way, behind, tight to the stable. We don't even know what that width is. And now the existing building goes down, and then the building they want to tear down is about 16 inches inward. You see, it's not on that plan. You see where the building is, the existing building is? Well, it comes down and it goes in 16 inches, and then the new building starts.
Okay, any more questions?
I don't have a question to Mr. Cundall anymore, but I do have questions to staff. Is it best to hold them at the end?
Let's hold, because we've got a couple more speakers, but I know Councillor Moffat has a question for Mr. Cundall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just had a question for you. Just in your discussion with Councillor Fleury, you mentioned that you were there for 80 years in the current location.
Yeah.
What was the impact of 144 Clarence when it was built on your property? Because it was a vacant parcel about 25 years ago.
There was a store there with a residential house, and there was a parking lot right beside it.
In the back?
Yeah.
And then now it's redeveloped as a fairly large condo building directly.
But they're in from our line, they're in the deck. There must be 20 feet in. Then the building goes up. So there's a flow of air coming through there. Like, the building's not built. The whole building, the residential part of it, is not right to the back. There's a parking lot, and then there's a deck where Gary is, and then the building starts to go up.
Okay.
There's a garage, and then there's a deck on top of the garage.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Cundall, for coming out.
Thank you.
Next on our list is Ron Smith, and Mr. Smith will be followed by David Fleming. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, committee. I'm glad to be able to be here. I don't know if I can answer every question. My name's Ron Smith. I'm the architect and planner for this project for our client. And I can probably, I didn't expect to speak, so maybe what I'll do is try to answer some of the questions. I don't think I've got a solution for everybody's requirements and needs, but I can probably address some of the major things that I've just seen here, and I've just jotted some of these items down. One, I think, is, this came up a couple of times, is the impact on snow. And snow, in fact, collected on our roofs, and then all the snow basically dissipates on the adjacent properties. Simply, whether it's an asphalt roof or a metal roof, we like the roof the way it is because it reflects the original heritage slope roof. But certainly, in our experience, we can basically stop a lot of the snow from sliding off using snow guards, etc. And that's a fairly appropriate way of handling the snow until the snow melt goes off. And in fact, I think the city will probably require that for just storm water management. snow just simply be as another form of water. So I think, in fact, we can control that and control the rate of snow coming off those roofs on either side of the building. And in fact, it's going to be as much a problem for us on our shared easement between ourselves and the stables. So it's going to be a concern that basically will be a shared concern within the neighborhood, and certainly with our most appropriate neighbor here, which is the stable side. Retaining the building as it is and the small section of the heritage section of the building, our client does need to have some space in the back and for the retail sales and storage. So one of the things here, we're looking at the uses, and certainly when you're looking at heritage structures, one of the most problematic concepts here of being able to renovate and reuse these structures is having a very sustainable sort of use for the project. Right now, it's a small office area and a cafe, and understandably, they've had a very large lot here, but they, in terms of their business, were unable to basically sustain the property, maintain the property, and our client has the means to do it, and I think we're not only bringing the retail, which is a nice mixed use to this street, but also we're able to have the means to actually renovate the building in the form that we're able to do. And in terms of the heritage section, we're trying to do that as best as we can. The rear of the building, certainly maybe not the most economical in facing the condo. And I do have a little concerns of ourselves. Also, the way that it was actually looked at, our original drawings showed something around 35 feet high. But the reality is the condominium, and I'm not sure how much thought they gave putting in an 11-foot high wall. It's an unmitigated concrete wall that faces our property. And in fact, when you extend our building rear addition on the back, it's only about a story and a half. So the reality is we're not looking at a full 35-foot high wall. We're going to be looking at about a story and a half building, which is about a shed size rather than a two-story building. The second thing was that we did consider that the exterior should have some kind of texture and enlightenment rather than the simple steel structure that we were putting on there. And it's a maintenance thing as well. So thinking about this, certainly we have brick in the front. Brick in the rear seems very appropriate. And we can actually use a recycled brick to give it the, certainly giving the heritage look, so it's not just a concrete block. And we're allowing ourselves the idea of putting in a fast-growing English ivy that will allow that actually to grow up against the rear facade. And I think generally that's not a bad attractive option than looking at our original proposal for just, some kind of galvanized metal. So I think that's not a very attractive way of actually treating it. At this point, from the city's point of view, I don't think we have any obligation to do anything more than that, but in terms of pushing it back, I don't see there's any great, that would actually restrict the second floor area that we actually have. So dealing with the existing structure, the small front building, it's not really geared to retail, so all our opportunity for retail is going to be in the back, so we're trying to optimize that location.
Mr. Smith, I'm sorry.
The front of the building.
Mr. Smith? Oh, sorry, your time is up, so I'm going to have to stop you there, but there are a number of questions, so...
I will say, I can take questions now, because I'm sure there's going to be a number of other things.
So maybe I'll start by asking about the minor variances that you're going to be seeking. And one of the important things to note, which again is always ends up sounding bureaucratic, but it's a reality and important for those who are in this room. There are, as it happens, 3 decision points. There's the heritage permit, which is before us here this morning. Separately, you are applying for a minor variance and relief from the overlay at the Committee of Adjustment, and I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. And thirdly, there will be site plan approval. Correct. But for the sake of clarity, and so that people around this table and people in the room can understand, what variances will you be seeking at the Committee of Adjustment? Can you just review those? Not that it's relevant to the heritage permit. Unfortunately, it's not, but I think it's important context for people to understand what you're going to be seeking at the Committee of Adjustment.
I think mainly, just to simplify it, there's actually on the, and I would think it would be the northwest side against the apartment building, we're actually asking to go at about around 20 inches, 2 feet closer to that property line. Technically, the usual requirement is to actually bring the wall back to the inside face of that rear addition. So we're asking to actually get closer to the property line in order to increase our interior space. One of the other reasons we are doing that is because on the, I would call it the stable side, we're very restricted by an existing easement. That easement doesn't allow us to actually build right to our property line, but also it will restrict the amount of square footage that we do have and the opportunity to build on the back addition. So essentially, it is that rear northwest elevation. As you can see, it's at the top of the page. I think there's a dimension up there. I can't really read it.
So on the northwest,
It's actually about a foot. Yeah.
so you're going to be requesting a zero setback at the northwest corner of the lot line? I just want to be clear.
Yes, at that one location. But as you can see, the wall will not follow the property line. It will actually be 90 degrees to the rear. So it goes from, let's see. Right there, yeah. Right there, that's only about a foot. And then coming down, it's actually 2'7" at that location, and it's about a foot off that line. But the actual wall will basically follow, let's see. This little guy is not really pushed. Yeah, there we go, right along there. So the variance will be that section, that little piece, that rectangle, right along that line right there.
Okay, thank you. I know Member Smallwood had a question.
Thank you. I had a couple questions. One thing I wanted to say is that this is, I think, one of the best buildings in that block, one of the best buildings in the market. It's a beautiful building, and I'm really delighted to see your plans to preserve and conserve the front of the building. I think that's really excellent. And I noticed in the report that you're keeping the finial and barge board trim. I was over at the building yesterday to look at it, and I see they're quite weathered, but I assume that you will be doing conservation work on them. It won't be a case of at some point you say, oh, they're worn, they need to be replaced. I'm assuming that's...
Well, yeah. I mean, my client has that. Part of their mandate is within the recycle reuse. Many cases, the projects that my client group actually undertakes, they would rather go in and invest in a community development, heritage development, and recycle reuse.
So they will
it's part of their mandate, part of the corporate mandate.
So the other thing I wondered is that the 2 points were raised, one about the gates and the other about the vent. Would your clients be prepared to pay to relocate the vent for Mr. Kundal so that it's not pointing out the side, it points out the front of his property instead of the side, and also relocate the gates to the further back so that they still protect the rear yard?
We actually have no problem with the gates. In fact, we would like to have them there for after hours. Actually, that's never been an issue. And if we have a chance after this meeting later on today, we plan on meeting some of the neighborhood. So I have no problem with the gate goes here or here. That's part of the discussion. I must say that one of the things here for the committee is that this is a shared liability We have just as much of an issue with the liability from the horses as we would protecting our own public and our own clientele. We do plan to bring in the public, though, through a main door right off the street. And in fact, this will be limited to a service-orientated use. The second item here is the vents, and I believe we've already accommodated the vent in question, or at least we can place vents. We've taken the building back at least 2.5 feet at this location, so the stable vents, we're trying to enable and maintain those uses at that location. So we've already made that adjustment.
Okay, so I just want to confirm, in either event, you will bear the cost of addressing those two issues with satisfaction.
Basically, it's required and necessary. We will do that. Yeah. And the same with the paving in here. We will have a discussion with our neighbor. In fact, the type of granite that we would be looking at would be urban-based, not a flat granite, so that generally there is a discussion about more of a European pattern of stones to accommodate the hooves of the horses, etc. So that's all been I don't think that's a no-brainer. That's pretty simple.
Okay,
and
thank you very
also
much.
Justice for slippage, etc.
You have a question? Question from Member Podolsky.
Question for Ron Smith. I've been listening to the proposal and the comments of your neighbors, and while I like the idea that you're creating a pitched roof building that is sympathetic to the existing building, one thing you did not make clear, which I really need to understand, is are you looking for any rear yard setback? Can you, as of right, build to the rear property line right now, or are you asking a variance for that?
No, we're not asking for a variance. I believe we can build a commercial use right to the property lines, all the property lines, except for where we are required to maintain the easement with our adjacent neighbor and the stables.
So at the present time, the easement goes right to the back property line? Right. So Mr. Kendall has the right to use that area.
That easement doesn't go to the back of the property. We've stopped our shed actually at the end of the easement.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, we have. It's shown on one of the drawings.
And just one more question for you. Usually when we get proposals, the way in which the building is ventilated and exhausted, heat and cooled is shown. What you're showing is an addition which shows no mechanical ventilation vents, cooling equipment or anything like that. Is it building, it's a retail building, is it?
It's a retail building. I think we just haven't got to that stage. We're thinking, our process right now has been purely on the planning side. In the upcoming weeks, as we go through this, we'll be thinking, we've already met with our civil engineer today, and we will be looking at the mechanical and the electrical requirements that will go into this building. At this point, we haven't had that discussion with our consultants, so it's to be discussed.
Because it would seem to me that the neighbors on all sides, you know, who are concerned about the visual appearance of it, when they find out what your rooftop heating units or what your vents are going to look like, that's going to alter their experience of this addition quite substantially. And I'm surprised that that hasn't been included in the submission, because it's so obvious that it's going to be a visual intervention. But anyway, so...
Well, we can advise planning staff, and probably will, now after you brought that up. We'll definitely take a look at it. And as we get more information, we'll do that. So thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for coming out. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next, and our final speaker on this item is David Fleming. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. I'm speaking on behalf of Heritage Ottawa. This is a challenging project, and while we applaud the applicant for the modest intervention and their willingness to do a sensitive rehabilitation of the existing building, heritage building, we do have some concerns about the project as a whole. Excuse me. A few weeks ago, this committee considered an application for development on the south side of York Street. And at that time, it was noted that that particular area of the Heritage Conservation District has been sort of given away for development that did not follow the existing guidelines. And with the idea that the north side of York Street would remain, at least of the streetscape, similar to what it looks like now, and would be modest retail and perhaps residential. We have a problem with the addition. Given what has been given up on the south side, why not just say, okay, we're going to restore the existing building, we're going to demolish the modern addition, and not do anything else. So that's a trade-off. The trade-off is not being, you're going to go to the Committee of Adjustment to try to build a larger addition in the back, which, as we heard from the neighbors, is going to cause some distress, especially the ones who live on York Street. And I think what we have to try to do is to look at some of these developments and, from a heritage standpoint, not what we're going to give up, but what we're going to gain. And I think by keeping the building as it is, and by following the plans to conserve and preserve the existing building, I think is a positive thing. But why not say, okay, we're going to look at the backyard, not what we can get away with by putting a massive addition that goes to the property line. And I don't have too much of a problem with the height, although the height is a problem. But the fact that as of right, the applicant can do this under the commercial guidelines or zoning of the area is of some concern. If we're really going to be serious about preserving the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. So I think rather than looking for what we can bend the rules to do, what we should be doing is easing off on the idea of looking for variances and to try to preserve this north side of York Street in this particular block to the as a reflection of what the Built Heritage Conservation District should be. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Fleming? Member Smallwood?
Thank you. It's not often I disagree with you, but I think I'm going to disagree with you here. I'm concerned that you're suggesting that the owner of a heritage building should have their rights removed from any development rights. You seem to be saying that you're suggesting that we would support removing all development rights from the person who owns a heritage property and let people on the other side of the street go ahead and get all the development rights. So I'm very concerned about that, and I hope that's not what you're suggesting, because it certainly, to me, would send a very negative message out to the owners of historic buildings.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. What I am suggesting is that what the city should be trying to do is to encourage proponents and developers of these properties not to be looking for these variances, and to try to find people who are willing to keep it as they are, and to totally reflect the heritage nature of the neighborhood. I agree with you. To be some incentive there, but maybe there are also people out there who would be willing to just abide by the rules as they are, and that's what we should be encouraging. Thank you.
If I can just follow up, no, we're not dealing with the variances here, so that's a separate issue altogether. We're dealing with the idea of building an addition. So the issue of variance is whether it's requires a variance or not is not what we're talking about here.
Yes, no, I agree.
It's not a case of bending rules.
No, but what I'm saying is that what we should be doing is encouraging people to develop them so that you don't have to do variances. That's basically what I'm saying. It's a much higher level, I guess, proposal or opinion rather than just looking at this particular one.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask to clarify, is Heritage Ottawa supporting or opposing this application?
No, we support the application. We think it's a very good application from a heritage perspective, and I think it should be used as a model for the type of development that is done here. We do, though, have a problem with the consequences of it and the consequences of how it goes for site plan approval.
Okay,
but that's a general problem.
Thank you for the clarification, and thank you for coming out this morning. So that exhausts our speakers list. So if there are any questions or comments to staff at this stage, I see Member Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question about Chair Nussbaum referenced that the opponent is looking for an exemption from the overlay. Can you elaborate on what that's going to entail, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The underlying zoning of this property is MD, which is a downtown commercial zone, but the heritage overlay does apply on the property. And the heritage overlay requires a 60 centimeter inset of a new addition to the original. So, as Mr. Smith was pointing out, there's a requirement for relief from that provision here, as well as here. As I understand, that's plus or minus 14 inches, so about 8. It's a little bit short, 6 inches short or so here. You need 2 feet essentially. So there's a technical requirement, the way that the rear yard setback provision is written in the heritage overlay section of the zoning bylaw. It does refer to underlying zoning to determine the rear yard setback, which in this case is 0, as well as the side yard setback. However, the way the provision is written, it does say that in no case can the setback be less than 3 meters. So there's a technical requirement to request relief from that. So we do.
Is that just on the west side, or is that all around?
That's at the rear.
That's at the rear?
Yes.
Okay, so the rear.
The north setback here.
Okay.
So there's essentially
3 meters. Okay.
3 points of the project that require 2 separate variances.
This just clarifies a point that I think that Mr. Smith, an answer to, I don't know whose question it was, but I also briefly wanted to follow that up by asking if the heritage, within the Heritage Conservation District for this area, does it reference in any way the adjoining backyards as a character defining element, about the open space and interconnection of backyards?
There is, Mr. Chair, there is a reference to determining appropriate heights and setbacks based on the adjacent heritage properties. Mm-hmm. So if we look, in this case, we have 2 adjacent sort of contributing heritage properties, one here, the horse stable property, and that has a 0 rear yard setback and a 0 side yard setback. We do also have the residential building here. So there is a rear yard setback here, but the policy does say to sort of determine appropriate setbacks based on adjacent properties.
So immediate adjacent, or the block, or how are you interpreting it?
So it says adjacent. So in this particular context, we're looking at the adjacent property to the west that also has a 0 rear yard setback. But the issue of determining the appropriateness of the setback is something that we understand will go through the minor variance process as well. So we've determined that this setback is appropriate given the adjacent property to the west and also the zero setback of the first floor of the condo building to the north.
Okay, thank you for being quite specific in your answer. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions, and I'll start with the broader one, which is, I believe there is at times a conflict between the goals of the HCD in an area like the Byron Market and the neighboring MD zone. And I'd love to hear from staff on the specifics of how Mr. Willis in the past had said that the MD zone would be reviewed. We know that there's active applications within the MD zone, which permits a lot of height and a lot of density. And I want to understand how overall staff are seeing the MD zone being complementary to the HCD zone, and if there needs to be amendments to create a bit of a buffer. It's more of a general comment, but it indirectly applies to this application. As you know, I believe the MD zone, that's the last property of that on that block for the MD zone. And the MD zone allows for lot line to lot line building, as you know. So I don't know who's best positioned to speak to those references of how do we feel that the MD and the Heritage Conservation District zones live with one another, and is there conflict overall, and is it something that we should be careful of, not necessarily specific to this application, but overall where the border is?
Mr. Chair, in the sense that the heritage permit application does require us to do a thorough analysis of the property based on the district guidelines, and also we apply the for heritage, the standards and guidelines for heritage conservation, the Parks Canada document I'm referring to. Staff does feel that the analysis of the project is sufficient to ensure, despite zoning, that the proposal is appropriate from a heritage conservation perspective.
Yeah, and I'm not, maybe Mr. Curry can speak to, I mean, we have an application in front of us. I have a few questions related to the application, but overall the theme here is there a conflict between the MD zone and the HCD zone in your mind, and is going forward, what's the plan for the MD zone? Because is there an opportunity to give it some character that reflects the themes that we're trying to establish in the HCD zone for the Byron Market?
Councillor, as Mr. Maloney said, I think that the level of analysis that we can undertake in the HCD provided by the HCD plan mitigates some of the challenges of the MD zone. That being said, my understanding is, as you've pointed out, the MD zone in 2018 with its minimal setbacks and adjacencies does cause conflict within the neighborhood, and so that will be something that I'll be discussing with Mr. Smith and Mr. Willis as in terms of the future of the MD zone as a zoning tool.
Thank you. Now, specific to this application, we've had this conversation, but I want to make sure it's public, and I want to understand it as well. We have existing heritage uses. We have an application for which, generally, as highlighted by Mr. Smallwood, is good. It's a heritage building, and they're bringing forward an application to protect that. The concerns are mainly to existing, what I'll describe as quote-unquote heritage uses of the stables and its impact to the additions. And I want to know how that's factored in this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The functionality of an adjacent use the impacts have not been specifically analyzed in terms of, in this case, how the horse stable may continue to function. There is recognition, of course, that is an existing land use adjacent to this property, but it's the direct impact on the functionality of that stables is outside the realm of sort of the review from staff in terms of this proposal. as mentioned previously, there is a site plan application and minor variance application that would hopefully address very particular concerns that might relate to the impact on adjacent land use.
So from a department point of view, you're only looking at it from a building and how that reflects the HCD and not necessarily on, you believe that the impacts to the adjacent uses are site plan matter? Is that kind of a fair assessment?
Mr. Chair, we do look at the existing character of the streetscape, and it is our goal to ensure that the character of the streetscape isn't compromised. So in this case, it's a low-rise residential streetscape along the north side of York Street. So by virtue of building the addition and building an addition that's lower than the original building, we do feel that the character is protected in a sense, and there is recognition within the Byward Market Plan that there's an evolution of uses within the district. So in this case, what were residential properties, there have been some turnover to commercial use, and it does reflect that sort of character within the Byward Market of sort of adaptive reuse of buildings. So in that sense, the project was analyzed through that lens, and we're comfortable that the character has been preserved.
So just as a final wrap-up for me, Mr. If you wouldn't mind, retail uses in the Byward Market are extraordinarily important, and seeing an organization like Patagonia come in and invest in the area is very important, and protecting the heritage is very important. I don't blame it on them. I blame it on the lot line to lot line zoning, and I wish that the applicant were to propose a rear step back that would correct two elements. One, which is the existing residential uses on the other side, but also freeing up some light and air for the existing heritage uses. So I will continue to pursue that. They reflect my comments as part of this application. Again, it's a challenge where you have an existing use that we're trying to protect in terms of the stable. At the same time, it is a sensible protection of that property. The addition, in my mind, it's too extensive to the lot line, and I wish that the applicant would come back and provide some relief there for the uses, but also for the residential neighbors. I believe, they seem to be trying to find a solution that would be moving the vent, that would be the fences, which I believe to be a good step, but I'd ask the applicant to consider some relief off the lot line. So that would be my comment relating to the application.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up a bit on that idea, Mr. Chair, because it affects not just this area, but every area of the city that has a heritage designation. And it's part of the weaknesses we have in our whole planning system. Because every time I get a plan of anything and I get to them, it's only for that actual property. And I have to take a look at what's the next door. The staff say they look at it a bit, but it's minimal. I have one being built now that it's next to the urban boundary. They don't want to have any place where you could ever, in the future, have a connecting link in case that ever does come into the urban area. And they did that before. It's caused huge problems. And it's a case of we don't think in our planning, and this is not your responsibility particularly. And I think those points that are being raised by Councillor Fleury are exactly that point, that we have a plot or a building or a site plan or whatever. It's not unique in its own self. It's part of a whole entity. And in this case, it's a heritage entity, so it has particular importance. And the uses have particular importance. So I don't know, it's really more, I think, for looking forward as you review the official plan and everything else. I think there needs to be some changes made. So they have some overall statements about fits in with the neighborhood and things, but it doesn't seem to pay much attention to it. And we've had these same problems in Centertown, I know, with Councillor McKinney. I have a few in my area that have, and I'm sure probably every councillor's had some of them. And if we could clarify that, because I think it would take It would help the community to understand better what's happening if we actually looked at the whole area a little bit when we're doing plans. And so I actually suggested to Councillor Fleury that he checks the site plan conditions extremely carefully to make sure some of the things we've raised here today are in there, because they tend to get missed. So it's really more a job for maybe this committee to work with staff to see if we can make some improvements, which we're always doing and have already been doing over the last few years, to ensure that we actually don't lose our heritage by effectively our neglect.
Okay, any other speakers? Mr. Vice Chair?
I'd just like to say that I support the staff report and will be voting for it. I think that the reason for it is that, as Councillor Fleury said, retail uses are not only permitted, but they're something that are difficult to introduce into the Byward market area, and to enrich the mix of uses. I think that having a new retailer come in is a very positive thing, and investment in this property will support the conservation of the existing building and its streetscape, which I think is a very desirable thing. Form of the addition, though it's lot to lot, is essentially permitted in this zone, and by choosing a house shape or a barn shape at the back of it, it does not detract from it. I do appreciate the comments that are made from the people that live in the 144 Clarence, but without wanting to alienate them, I'd like to say that that building, which was built, had a very negative impact on the scale of the Byward market, and the people that live there certainly are good neighbors and benefit from the market. But I'm not that sympathetic to the concerns, and that's pretty daring of me from this position to say that. But I think that the overall project is a very good project, and I hope that the owners of and Patagonia will be very sensitive to and support the Cundall stable operation. They have to become best friends, because that's part of the landmarks of the city. So I'll be supporting the application.
Okay, just a final question to staff before I wrap up, which is just with regard, Mr. Maloney, you mentioned the overlay requiring a 3-meter setback. Do you think that the overlay contemplated a zone with a 0 rear yard setback? Meaning, is that perhaps a mistake in Section 60 of the zoning bylaw? Does that need to be reviewed by staff, or do you think it's appropriate the way it is?
It is, Mr. Chair, it's my understanding that there is a possibility that the 0 rear yard setback was not contemplated as a scenario, given the language of that particular provision. But when you apply grammar rules, the way it's written, you must require a 3-meter setback, right, no matter what the underlying zoning.
I just want at the next opportunity when that bylaw is reviewed, if Heritage staff may want to take a look at that, because I think that was a source of some confusion, and maybe in future it won't be if that gets sorted out. Thank you for that, and the Vice Chair said much of what I wanted to say. I think evaluating this application to alter an existing heritage property under Part 5, we need to look at the Lower Town Heritage Conservation District. We need to look at the Ontario Act. Staff's advice is this is consistent with both. I would agree with that. I think also when you contemplate an adaptive reuse of this kind, there has to be a measure of acceptance that there are going to be elements of a project like this which perhaps aren't ideal in Heritage Ottawa's eyes, but are part of what one does when one contemplates adaptive reuse. And let's not forget the staff's point that we have buildings, actually 2 properties to the east, the immediate adjacent property to the and the property to the north, which all have a part or all of their structure right up to the rear lot line. The existing condition of the property in question in the rear is a parking lot, which is interesting context. That's why I too will be supporting the staff recommendation, and I'll put it before the committee now as the staff recommendation. First is the Vice Chair technical amendment carried? Yes. Carried. And then the amended staff recommendation, is that carried? Carried. Great. Okay, thank you. And to members of the public, thank you for coming out, and you will have an opportunity to raise issues related to the setbacks at Committee of Adjustment. I'm told there isn't a date for that meeting yet, but I'm sure staff will alert you to that. Thank you for coming out. So if you can just speak to the staff afterwards.
No, I'd just like to clarify what you said. The planner told us that this would be our only chance of speaking to this problem.
No, that's not correct. So, yeah. So you can speak to staff, but there is a Committee of Adjustment process. I'm going to move on to the next item, which is item 2 on our list, which is the application for alteration of the Medical Arts Building. Will recall that we had this item before us early on in our term with a specific application, and now there is a application to alter 180 Metcalfe Street, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And we're going to start with a short presentation, and then we have members of the public who've signed up to speak. So over to staff, please, for a brief presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. You'll forgive me, I'm a bit rusty. My first one of these in a while, but the application before the committee today is an application to alter the Medical Arts Building at 180 Metcalfe Street. The property is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it was designated on recommendation of this committee in 2015. Property is located at the northwest corner of Nepean and Metcalfe Streets. You can see in this, you can see here, the original building is here, and the rear part of the lot is currently used as a surface parking lot. At the time of designation in 2015, there was an accompanying zoning bylaw amendment that was approved for this site that contemplated a 27-story tower, 83 meters on the site, and including retention of the building. So this application that is before the committee today is to implement that plan with some changes to the approach. So the current condition of the property is the same as it was in 2015. The Medical Arts Building was constructed in 1928, designed by Werner Nofke, and is a rare and good example of the Art Deco style in Ottawa. The building is a landmark at the corner of Metcalfe and Nepean Streets, and was one of the earliest purpose-built office buildings in the downtown core, and is part of a trend of medical arts buildings that were built across the country in the 1920s and 30s. The primary facades of the building are located on Nepean and Metcalfe. The secondary southern facade here is adjacent to an apartment building and is not as visible as the front and the north facade. This is looking north along Metcalfe Street. You can see the front facade of the building. We have the newly finished, or not that new, I guess, Tribeca across the street where the Sobeys is. This is looking east at the rear facade of the building. I guess the lighting in the room makes it a bit difficult to see, but here's the rear facade of the building, the existing surface parking lot, and again, the newly constructed Tribeca building across the street. So at the time of the designation, just to give a little background, the original proposal was to remove this rear facade and construct a 6-story podium attached and integrated to the existing building. The approach has changed, and I will explain that in a couple of minutes. Just to give you an idea of some of the architectural elements of the building, because I will talk about them a little later. As I said, it's a good example of the Art Deco style in Ottawa, characterized by certain heritage attributes such as these decorative brick panels, these decorative metal panels that you see on both the front and the north facade of the building, as well as this two-story arched entrance